Okay, so we have made it to the Underworld Saga. Very important stop in the Odyssey, in which we must go and meet with Tiresias, who is a blind prophet from the city-state of Thebes. He's been dead a good while, and we must receive information from him. Now, Tiresias isn't necessarily going to tell them the way to get home or anything else like that, but he's still there to deliver information. This saga is only 3 songs. It makes it incredibly short. I think the shortest of the sagas thus far. Most of them have been at least 4 songs, which makes me like a little sad, only because I know tons is going to get cut out. In a way that I understand, a lot of the stuff that happens in the underworld is stuff that doesn't affect the rest of the story. It's just stuff that I personally enjoy. And from an adaptation standpoint, it's smart to cut a lot of the stuff that happens in the underworld outside of a couple characters and also in meeting with Tiresias. I hope we keep some of it. I mean, I think that the Troy saga made it clear we have no problem doing name drops of characters who we're not really going to interact that much with. And because they were established in the Troy saga, it might be nice to mention them in here. I mean, like, say, Agamemnon, because we already mentioned him. And it would be cool to see something like Greater Ajax, if only because that instance always makes me sad, or as well even Achilles, who we would also meet in the underworld. Again, we meet/see a lot of people in the underworld, but the big interactions in the underworld are Tiresias, Odysseus's mother, Agamemnon, Achilles, also Heracles, though Heracles is an interesting case because even Homer points out that like it's his shade, but the man himself is up basically living on Olympus with his new bride Hebe. Lots of things happen in the underworld. Most of it I assume is going to get cut out because this saga is only 3 songs and a lot of it doesn't necessarily need to be there, but I am hoping at least for some name drops in the same way that the Troy saga at least had some name drops. But okay, let's get into it, and we'll start with the first song, which is The Underworld. Ooh, the ship.
Friends,
Tar.
Circe's instructions were clear. No matter what we hear, full speed ahead until we find the prophet. My comrades, this land confuses your mind, so no matter who we find, full speed ahead until we find the prophet. Good.
First things first, I love the soundscape. The creaking of the ship, the dissonance in the harmonies is really nice. It emphasizes that what they're doing is reasonably dangerous. Mortals who were alive do not normally go down to the underworld. It is in very rare occasions, and it is highly dangerous to do so. One, you can be overwhelmed by the number of people you wish to see who have passed. I mean, obviously, you're going to be surrounded by people you know who have died, and that's part of the great tragedy of when Odysseus goes down to the underworld, as he is desperate as it goes on to see more and more of his friends or people he knows who have passed. And it's like that's one of the major dangers. The other is that often shades or ghosts will constantly flock to you because they want to overwhelm you, basically asking about what's happening in the real world, and it makes them even more upset. So it's very emotional, and it can be dangerous. Like, you can get stuck. So they say, until we find the prophet. So basically what they have to do when they get to the underworld is lead their boat to a specific area of the shores of the underworld and make a sacrifice. I believe it is some sort of cow that they sacrifice, and call out for Tiresias and like hope that he comes. So they sort of have to go and find him, but it's more make him come to you. But I'd wager we're not going to be doing any sort of animal sacrifices in this musical, as we have not thus far, and there are many that have kind of already happened in the Odyssey, so it makes sense to say we're just going to go and find him. He's wandering here somewhere, but I mean, also remember the underworld is freaking huge. It would be hard to just go and find him. Which is like, how many blind prophets are there? I'm like, yeah, but this is literally everyone who has died, and they're all over the place. The underworld be big. Ooh. That sound, almost like cries. Oh, it is actually cries, I think.
All I hear are screams every time my eyes. I no longer dream, only nightmares of those who died. Nothing's what it seems. Nothing's what it seems. And here in the underworld, the past seems close behind. This land confuses your mind.
I have to ask, these are questions I don't know if anybody can answer. This is more curiosity. This sort of mechanical sound that's here, it sounds almost like chains. I'm curious as to what that's meant to be, because I will say this, the underworld is not necessarily a place of like suffering. Like these souls are not in some sort of condemned place. I mean, unless you're in Tartarus. If you're in Tartarus, you condemned. You in trouble. But there is also the Elysian Fields, which is where great heroes go after they pass. And then most of the other shades are just sort of wandering around the underworld. It's not described as any sort of the way a modern, almost like Christian sense of hell would be. Like, this is not Dante and his 9 circles. So it is always interesting to me where the underworld is portrayed in this way. There's such a heightened sense of almost negative inference put onto it, when it was actually reasonably pretty neutral. I mean, after all, there would be the judges of the underworld, which would decide, are you going to Tartarus? Are you going to the Elysian Fields? Or are you just sort of released unto the underworld wild, if you will? And this is... Like, yes, me personally, I'm not sure how I feel about that. Even though I love this song, I would want to hope and think this is just meant to be Odysseus's thoughts on being in the underworld, how he feels. Like, it is very true. A lot of the underworld, there's a good chunk of it where he is spent surrounded by those he knows who have died. I mean, one of the big shockers for him is finding Agamemnon there, who he had no idea had died, and he hears what happened to him, and it really shakes him up. Seeing, you know, greater Ajax, seeing Achilles, and then obviously, yes, we will get to his mother and others. And another big one, who again, we have not mentioned at all, being that of Elpenor, the youngest member of all of his crew that are left. And he tells him, yeah, so I fell off the roof. I was drunk, I slept on the roof, I fell off the roof, I'm dead, like, do not leave me there. Otherwise, like, you'll essentially be cursed by the fact that you left one of your men unburied without proper honors. He's like, you know, go through, give me my honors. Again, as I've said many a time, burial rites super important to the Greeks. Funerary rites, funerary honors.
Do it right.
Or you could have big problems later, but also it would be horrifying to the Greeks if you didn't. Again, one of the big things in the Iliad is not just that you have 2 major sections that are devoted to funerary games, but it's the fact that Achilles was initially going to take Hector's body and not allow him to be buried, which, like, to the Greeks of that time, quaking, shook beyond belief. Like, even that would had the Greeks being just like, that's too much, bro. Like, what? What do you mean you're not going to let him be buried? Like,
Bro, too far.
which is part of what adds to that scene where King Priam comes and he's begging for his son's body, begging for it to be released back to him so that he can properly bury him. Like, that would have, even though, yes, Priam is the king of Troy, he's, you know, the major, and he's an antagonist in this massive conflict. Like, to the Greeks, they'd have sided with Priam. They'd have been like, yeah, give him back his son's body. Like, that scene, I think even now resonates on a deep emotional level. This king who has come to this man who killed his son in combat and is begging for his son's body. Back then, the Greeks, same thing. They would have been so overwhelmed with emotion at that. And, like, on his side saying, like, Achilles, you have to give him the body. You have to do that. If you don't, like, even the Greeks would have been like, nah, Achilles, we can't fuck with you. But because in this, we have not really brought up Elpenor at all, I think people have mentioned that, like, his voice is heard in places, but he's never named, he's never pointed out. We're not going to bring it up. It also would necessitate going back to Circe at this point, unless they had done it earlier, but we are not imposing such an importance on the idea of burial rites here. That's a cultural thing, which, like, makes so much sense to the ancient Greeks. To us, it would feel like wasting time in the story. So I completely understand cutting it out. This is just me also saying, just like, I'm super curious who we're going to end up meeting as a result of this trip to the underworld. Because again, you get the chance to name drop in the same way you did in The Horse and the Infant. Like, so much room for name dropping and reflecting this great emotion that Odysseus has. I mean, the Odyssey and the Greek epics and even the Greek, tragedies and other stories are filled with emotion. I think some people get caught up in the language of these stories and have a harder time feeling it, but like the Odyssey is an extremely emotional story. And Odysseus' trip through the underworld is one of those moments. I mean, he is confronted with so much while there. And it's a rough thing to go through, and he knows it's going to be rough, but he also knows he has to do it. So oof, I love that. All I hear are screams every time I dare to close my eyes. I no longer dream, only nightmares of those who've died. Yeah, that's sort of what that trip to the underworld is for him. Please, Jorge, give me name drops. Like, you set up that you have no problem doing name drops like you did in the Troy Saga. This is the place for more name drops.
When does a man become a man?
Oh, is this the crew?
558 men who died under your command.
558. Okay, well, 550 that went down in the 11 ships. I said we lost 6 in the Polyphemus cave. Who are the other 2? I mean, I guess one is meant to be Elpenor, even though we never mentioned him. This is gonna be a real problem. Like, if I am not good at math, but if I can even look at going, that's pretty easy math, guys. 556. Easy math, guys. I mean, 557, if we include Elpenor, who we haven't even mentioned, which, I mean, this is one where I'm sad, and you're going to get moments like this. We're going to be going, wait a minute. I don't want to get hung up on numbers here. This requires some tightening in the writing to get all that stuff in line. Again, there are mistakes. We'll consider this a first full draft, right? There's mistakes. There are known mistakes. Plenty of them. Some of them might need some kinks that need to be worked out. I think the numbers are one that maybe should be worked out here. Yeah, no, I don't know who the extra person is. There's just like a lone extra person who got killed somewhere. I don't know.
Captain,
Yeah, these are the crew.
Captain, why would you let the
these
Cyclops
harmonies.
live when ruthlessness is mercy? All I hear are screams.
Yeah, why would you let the Cyclops live? If you're going to engage him in combat, why would you let him live? Yeah, his crew, right? Yeah. So we don't necessarily go through the meeting of the crew in the underworld in the Odyssey, but we have had this event pretty recently, so bringing them in, sure, and re-emphasizing when ruthlessness is mercy, pointing out like, dude, we died because of you. And I like having the crew with this very tightly layered harmonies. Gorgeous. Also, I noted the dun 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 dun. This melody has recurred throughout Epic, going all the way back to Horse and the Infant. I believe, I have seen in the comments, it's called like the danger motif. It's interesting how it slips its way in there. I don't comment on it every time that I hear it, but it's very prominent here, especially when we've dropped out a lot of the instrumentation behind them in order to highlight these voices.
Every time I dare to close my eyes, I no longer dream. Only nightmares of those who died.
I no longer dream, only nightmares of those who've died. This is one of those moments where I have to ask the question, yes, this is the concept album, but because we don't have a libretto, like we don't have a book or a script book that gives the entirety of the play laid out for us in text, is there meant to be moments that are not sung in between these songs? Because right now we just have Odysseus telling this to us, but we haven't been given evidence of him being like haunted in nightmares by these men. And again, also because we shortened the Circe encounter so much and don't spend 3 days there, we don't get him like waking up in night sweats or anything. This is one of those things where I'm being told and I'm not being shown. It's a beautiful line. I'm not arguing with like how this is absolutely a lot of the emotion that's going on down in their visit to the underworld. But it shows a bit of writing that might need to be expanded upon, might need to be refined, because we're just being told it. We're not being given evidence of it in the play, unless, again, there's a libretto somewhere that's having scenes in between all of these. And that's where it'd be good for a script book to be released. I understand, again, this is a first draft. Maybe you don't want to release a libretto for something that's still, at the end of the day, potentially in progress, but it's helpful because that's context and moments that we need which flesh out these characters more and gives them more depth and complexity. Just a note on that, because the lines are great, but we're just being told it here. We haven't been given great evidence of it in terms of like acting or the like, and it's where I wonder, are there spoken scenes that are missing between all of the songs? If that's the case, give us a script book that's got all of that, because it would add a lot, especially in my case when I'm sitting here going, stuff feels like it's missing, right?
Nothing's what it seems, nothing's what it seems, but in the underworld the past seems close behind. I keep thinking of the infant from that night. I keep thinking of the
First time he's really mentioned Astyanax.
This life is amazing when you
Don't tell me we're doing Polites, but like none of the others that are in the Odyssey.
face. We'll be fine if we're leading from the heart. No matter the place where we can light up the world, here's how to start. Greet the world with open arms. Greet the world with
That's-
open arms.
Since we're over halfway through the song, I have a feeling that Polites was substituted in place of Alpanor, in place of Agamemnon, Achilles, Heracles, Greater Ajax, all of these things. And part of this is very much personal opinion in that I wish we had those other encounters, especially, I mean, Agamemnon, that one shocks the hell out of Odysseus. And you name dropped him in The Horse and the Infant. So it's a callback to that, right? Like, okay, yeah, we do Astyanax, first time we've ever freaking mentioned him, which again, are there scenes missing where we delve more into how he's feeling about that? And things like cut songs and the like for me don't count because that's not in the final product that I'm being given here. It may be a work in progress, but cut songs don't count because they wouldn't be staged, right? They would not appear. They're cut. They are excised. They were deemed unimportant to this draft. And here's my thing with Polites. I understand very much that he is like the darling of a lot of people of this musical. And in general, I don't really have an opinion on Polites. He was there very briefly, gave one song and died. And there's some interesting analysis in terms of where his song is placed in the narrative and him dying so early, I guess. Here's the problem I have. Everybody knows that, like, oh, but that's his best friend ever. I'm like, where is that said in the narrative? Yes, I brought in the context of saying, yeah, he's listed as like an old friend of Odysseus and a dear friend to him twice in the Odyssey, and he doesn't speak at all. Great, you can come in with that context, but in the context of the musical, other than him saying my friend, which is used by many characters in this story or in the musical, where is it stated that he is so special compared to everybody else? I mean, arguably, Eurylochus comes in and offers deeper and more, like, intimate wording of how he feels about Odysseus in Luck Runs Out, where he says, "You're like the brother I could never do without." That says a lot about how he feels about Odysseus. And look, as much as I am number one in the Odyssey, Eurylochus is a royal pain in the ass and an absolute problem with a capital P. Even in the musical, they've done more to show an intimacy between Eurylochus and Odysseus in how they're trying to talk to each other than I got with Polites and Odysseus. And this is where I'm pointing to the writing, is to do a bit more. Maybe change some of the dialogue and the lyrics, adjust it so we really get a sense of how close these guys are. Like, make it clear that maybe they've been best friends since childhood. I don't know. Like, do something. Because otherwise, I'm like, it feels like we are shoehorning in Polites into everything here, right? And him being in here, I'm like, oh, okay, sure. Because all I've got is everything's changed since Polites. I'm like, okay, really? Has it? Why? Because I haven't been given that. I don't feel I've been given that in the music. And my thoughts on Polites as a character aside, I should be able to feel that bond. But there hasn't, he was in there so briefly. I wasn't given enough in the brief encounter when Polites was alive to truly believe that. Because in the Cyclopscape, yes, Polites dies, but so do apparently, I guess, maybe 7 other people? If we're gonna say that maybe it wasn't 6 who died in the cave. Oh wait, so that would be 6 other people. Whatever. A grand total of, I guess 7 people have died now. If we're saying that the extra one is Elpenor. who again hasn't really featured in the narrative at all. That's shocking in and of itself, especially if we're claiming that these are the first men he lost ever in 10 years, right? So you can see why I'm starting to harp. This is where, if there's some clunkiness and weakness in the writing, I start picking it apart, going, wait, you know, you've done this and but this. And I'm not trying to say the writing is bad. I'm very much not saying that. Just saying there's some weak points. This is a first draft. Of course there's weak points. People don't spit out a perfect first draft. I fully expect there to be, like, kinks and things that need to be worked out. But if I can sit there and point them out, especially in a situation like this, it means they're reasonably glaring. I think Polites is kind of glaring, and it's not just because he is so antithetical to the culture. That's not it. The way they paired him with the Lotus Eaters actually made that encounter kind of interesting. It's this constant re-emphasis on him where I'm like, maybe there needs to be a bit more work done in there, right? To really give the sense of how close Odysseus and Polites are. Something to think about. And I also have a feeling he co-opted the place of other characters who personally I would have liked to see more, and this is your opportunity to name drop again like you did in The Horse and the Infant. And I think actually Agamemnon would have been a really interesting case, because here's Agamemnon who came home in the same way that Odysseus so desperately wants to. Like, Odysseus so desperately wants to get home. That's his driving force for the whole of the Odyssey. And he meets with Agamemnon. Agamemnon's like, no, I didn't die my nostos. I came home, you know, I returned home to my wife and my children, but it was that fucking Aegisthus and my wife who killed me. Like, my fucking wife killed me. Now again, Agamemnon's a hot mess. Like, let's agree that every character in Greek mythology is basically a hot mess. It's just kind of a requirement. But that would be so great, because then you provide a contrast for Odysseus. You provide a moment of him going like, what? Your wife did that? Wow. And maybe give Odysseus a line even just to himself where he's like, Penelope would never. Or maybe have him think a moment of, would Penelope? No, she would never. And you get to reinforce more of this, what seems to be an attempt at building Odysseus and Penelope as this grand love story, which is tough when she's not in the narrative for so much of it. Bringing in a moment like Agamemnon, as opposed to, say, Polites, allows you to reinforce this bond between Odysseus and Penelope, especially if you're then also, and I'd give a bet he will, bring in Odysseus's mom who has passed away. And that's going to be so important, because it then makes him yearn even more to go home because he misses on that. These are just things I'm spitballing and pointing out where there's ways to use the source material to your advantage when you're doing adaptive writing. If you're looking at it as, I need to cut everything in order to tell my story, that can be a bit of a problem. And it also comes down to understanding why the original was written the way that it is, and that includes a lot of cultural context and stuff like that. But aside, I don't love this pushing forward of Polites here in this moment. I wish we had somebody else doing it. But most of that is a personal gripe, though I make an argument that putting in someone like Agamemnon, who we name dropped earlier in The Horse and the Infant, would be great, because we can tie in Penelope and Ithaca and this desire to go home. And I'd give a bet we're gonna meet Odysseus's mom, because it's another one of the big moments, and it's like so heartbreaking in the Odyssey. Yeah, that's gotta be his mom.
That voice.
Oh.
It can't be. Mom?
Piano. So gentle, like a lullaby almost.
I'm right here, Mom. Can't you see I'm waiting?
That's interesting, can't you see? So that one of the major differences we're encountering here between the underworld in the Odyssey and the underworld as it is an epic, he's directly interacting with these spirits in the Odyssey. Like, he's talking with them, and that includes his mom, and again includes Agamemnon and all of these other characters. He talks with them. In fact, when he meets with Achilles, or again Achilles, I'm gonna rotate between the two names, Achilles asks after his son, and he says, like, what of my son, what of Neoptolemus, how is he, like, do you have word of him? What of my father? And Achilles even says, like, I would rather have a moment to be basically born again as like a poor farmer with nothing, no glory, none of it, just to see my father again. Like, again, the tragic emotions you get from these characters that he meets in the underworld is enough to make you just go, oh my God, like, crap. No wonder they can get overwhelmed in the underworld. And that's like, for Odysseus, it's very painful because he's like, I can't tell you anything about your father. I don't know. I can tell you what little I know of your son from what I saw at him. Like, he did you proud at Troy and he was great, but I don't know beyond that. I haven't even been home yet, which is like, it's so hard for him to then interact with a lot of these characters. And again, with his mom, he talks directly with her. She tells him everything that's, like, she remembers of what was going on at Ithaca before she passed. And it also includes stuff like, your father is in such despair. He's like living in a small house. Like, he has nobody come to visit him. He doesn't leave. He's living in essentially squalor. Like, his despair, his grief is so great. Like, you have to get home. Again, we build this further impetus, this like tearing at Odysseus's heart of wanting to get home, which I would wager we're not going to mention Odysseus's father, Laertes. And that's because a lot of the stuff with Laertes, it happens after the slaughter of the suitors. And it's literally the last part of the Odyssey is Odysseus with his father, Laertes, and eventually sort of helping his father in a way, as it seems like, move on. So I would bet we're not going to do that in Epic. It's because it comes after the big climax and the catharsis of the slaughter of the suitors. Like, you kind of don't need it. So I would wager we're not going to mention it here, but oh, that's a moment in the Odyssey that just makes you go, just take it.
Fine, who needs that?
But I love this. Again, I love the piano, how soft she is, just repeating the waiting. It's almost like a lullaby, a mother's lullaby singing to her child. Like, oof, that's brutal.
I took too long and ventured too far while you were waiting.
Nice harmony.
Bye, Mom.
Hmm.
All I hear are screams. Every time I dare to close my eyes, I no longer dream. Only now you
Brought all the despair to the surface.
Nothing's what it seems. But in the underworld, your past is always close behind. Your past is always close behind. Down in the underworld.
Nice. Interesting. Okay. So that's our first song. That's the underworld. The real emphasis on your past is always close behind. That is probably why Jorge chose to do the most recent deaths for Odysseus, which is important, but I think it does make you lose a little bit of a sense of just how long he's been away. I mean, at this point, it's been 13 years, because 10 at Troy and then 3 on Circe's island. Not that he was aware that that's what was happening, and then going to the underworld, which is where I would argue if you wanted to start to explain where those 3 years went, I would do it. If you're not going to do it on Circe's island, I would do it down on the underworld. Like, you could easily imagine time moves differently in the underworld than it does up above in the mortal realm, right? Like, that to me makes sense. The soundscape is very nice. I like how the last time we give that refrain of all I hear are screams and all of that. I love that it's Odysseus belting and half shouting it for his life, that's his despair coming to the surface, that's his grief. And again, I think I've said kind of all I need to say, and that I think work needs to be done involving Polites. I kind of wish we had a different character there. Like, Agamemnon would have been such a great choice. Oh, would have been such a great choice. To then follow up with his mom and allow you to give some time to Ithaca and Penelope and even Telemachus and the like, because it's tough to like remember to flash to them when it takes you away from Odysseus's story. one of the biggest issues in adapting the Odyssey is. I call it the Telemachus problem, basically. It's like, how do you deal with the story of Telemachus and Penelope and basically Ithaca and all of that when you want to focus on Odysseus? Like, how do you manage that in a way that doesn't feel jarring or like things come to a halt so we can go to Ithaca? And like, one of the big problems in adapting the Odyssey, just how are you going to structure it? How are you going to make it so it flows and moves really well? Yeah, no, strong start. We have not yet met Tiresias, so I would bet the next song, No Longer You, is meeting Tiresias, I would assume? I guess. I'm not sure.